My picture was in the paper and on the local news, and suddenly everyone knew my face. Sometimes people would see me and start to cry, and I'd cry too. Your mind plays tricks on you, weird ones. I'd walk through town and I'd think I could hear what people were saying as they spotted me. You have strange thoughts about being outside going for milk or something. Do people think I came out to feel their sympathy? Does it look like I'm going out just to get noticed? Should I become a hermit? Eventually, I grew a beard. It helped a little, but then people recognized the beard. I'd never wanted to be known as a victim of anything, just the opposite. I'd been a victim of my family history and my bad choices my whole life. Granite Mountain gave me the chance to be something else, a hard-working, responsible man. Someone in charge of his own life, someone willing to give to others, a strong person. Now at 21, I was something very different, the lone survivor. Was it what is it being famous for making it out alive of something that killed your best friends? It's a negative fame. You're famous for something you didn't do. Die. It's harsh, but that's the honest truth. Everywhere I went was for a funeral or a memorial or some event connected to Yarnell. I just wanted to get away, be anonymous, but that wasn't possible. A few weeks or so after the tragedy, I was scheduled to fly to New York to appear on Good Morning America. When I got to the Phoenix airport for my flight, the TSA employees saw me in the security line and waved me forward. I was thinking, I appreciate y'all, but I want to stay just right here. Thank you all the same. But they were being gracious. They wanted to show me love, so I went forward and skipped the long line. I could imagine the other travelers saying, "Wait, isn't that Brenda McDonough?" Even the Manhattan people knew who I was, believe it or not. I was walking down Madison Avenue and a woman saw me. "Aren't you that kid, that firefighter or something?" she said. I couldn't believe it. Every time I was recognized, it brought back the faces of Chris and the others, made the pain fresh again. It wasn't a normal grieving process. I didn't stay in my room and just cry my heart out. I felt it was my job to go to every funeral I could, speak at every memorial, attend every fundraiser, do every interview. It was my job to protect the families in any way possible. If I wasn't going to do TV interviews, someone was going to bug a wife or a mother to do them. Officials of the city of Prescott and their fire department asked me to do some interviews, and I obliged. I felt responsible for my brother's families, for their kids too. I said to myself, I need to be there to help their sons and daughters. If I died, Chris and the others would have taken care of Michaela, made sure she was all right. But how could I lessen their pain? I wanted to use myself up in helping these people, but I didn't know where to start. There were so many dark moments. After the tragedy and the outpouring of love came the questions. Why would 19 experienced hotshots go into a green canyon with flaming front nearby? Somebody isn't telling the whole truth. Reporters ran around asking anyone even remotely connected with the fire what had really happened. There were rumors, tons of them, and I started to hear words like cover-up and conspiracy, and then the lawsuits started. In December, the Arizona Division of Occupational Safety and Health released its report on the fire. It was a bombshell. It reported that the first incident commander at Yarnell, the guy in charge of fighting the fire, had been exhausted and had worked 28 days straight, possibly compromising his decision-making. It said that the Arizona State Forest Division ignored its own safety guidelines and failed to recognize that, in light of extreme fire behavior being exhibited that day, their tactics could not succeed. Officials had pursued a strategy that put protection of non-defensible structures and pasture land over firefighter safety. It said that officials knew the strategy wasn't working and were aware that a storm was going to push the flames toward the 19 men, but failed to pull them off the line in time. It also said that I and a bunch of other hotshots were exposed to possible smoke inhalation, burns, and death. They levied a fine of $559,000 for mishandling the fire and putting firefighters, including Granite Mountain, in danger. State Forestry appealed the fine. You could feel the mood in Prescott start to change. It always does when experts and lawyers get involved. What happened at Yarnell was so inexplicable and mysterious that someone must be hiding something, clearly, and I was one of the hotshots standing, so I became the object of a good deal of gossip. The questions had an edge to them now. What really happened out there, Brendan? Huh? What are you telling us? And why? Left unsaid was, why didn't you save those guys? I asked myself that all the time. Why didn't you do more? Were you emphatic enough to tell the guys that the fire was turning? Could you have warned them somehow in those critical moments around 4:20 p.m.? But to say, Eric, this thing is moving fast, stay in the black, never even occurred to me. It would have been a waste of my breath. Eric was our leader. He knew what he was doing. If I'd had specific information he lacked, I would have transmitted it immediately. But we were seeing the same things, and I didn't know half as much as he'd forgotten during his career. There was another voice inside my head playing a devil's advocate. What could you have done exactly? Stated your position and burned to death? For what? That still wouldn't have saved the other guys. All I would have done would have been add another name to the memorials and break a few more hearts. Nothing else would have changed. In the small part of my mind that was still capable of rational thought, I knew this was true. Every scenario I dreamed up for saving the crew shared one thing. They were all completely unrealistic. I couldn't have stopped what happened. All I could do was stop it from taking one more victim. But the first voice, the voice of guilt and rage, was stronger. I'd failed. I was the reason that so many lives around me were filled with pain, and I found that hard to take. One of the lowest times came when I heard that a relative of one of the Grant Mountain guys said I must have been drunk or on drugs the day of the tragedy. At the same time, another member said authorities were covering up what really happened at Yarnell and I was part of the conspiracy. I couldn't believe it. I'd been out the night before the tragedy having a few cocktails, sure, but that was typical for a lot of the guys on the crew. Drinking the day of the job when our lives were at risk? Being drunk on a fire line? No way. I was speechless. There were accusations that I was hiding what had really happened as some kind of government cover-up, another dagger that went deep. I brooded about those two things for months. How could family members think that of me? I knew these people. I'd tried to protect them after the tragedy. I'd stood up for their loved ones as best as I could. I got angry. I smashed some shit at my apartment. More than once. Because of the lawsuits, many of which are going to call me as a witness, I couldn't respond to the accusations. My depression found new depths to sink to. I felt like I was being attacked just for surviving. It seemed as if I'd been tangled up in lawsuits for years to come. I had no problem dedicating the rest of my life to memories of my 19 brothers, but the claims and counterclaims and the legal fights, I wanted no part of that. One morning in late July, I stood on the rim of Box Canyon in Yarnell. The wind moved fretfully around the ridgeline. Down below, a number of silver foil sheets flashed as the wind blew them here and there, and the saguaro cactus on the next ridge half a mile away appeared to waver in the heat. On the floor of the canyon, the earth was dark, as if it had been singed. Officials from the Fire State Forestry Division were moving around the canyon floor, stopping to take notes or measure a distance. I watched them for a few minutes, then stepped down the gentle gradient. The air cooled as I dropped lower. To the civilian eye, there was little to look at as I moved across the rough terrain. Some carbonized shrub, and that was all. The canyon was moonscaped. When I reached the floor of the shallow canyon, I bent down and touched the char that covered the dirt, as if I was feeling a child's head for fever. Then I began to run my fingers through it. My hand came back up black. Nothing. I moved to my left, studying the earth and occasionally bending over to scrabble my open palm in a wide arc, feeling the cool ground beneath my skin while the burned material filtered between my fingers. The sun beat down on my back. After a few minutes, my thumb stubbed against something sharp and I drew it back quickly. My hand was bleeding. I ignored it and reached for the thing I touched, a piece of partially melted glass. I studied it, then wiped the blood on my pant leg and moved on. I walked the rough circle encompassing about 30 yards. It was the same area the investigators had concentrated on. By the time the sun was high and the temperatures had risen to 100 degrees, I'd uncovered 10 objects, among them a scorched coffee mug, a broken tool head, and a miniature drip torch. I recognized each of them. Half of the boys had left something behind. I could picture the events that led these objects to be here. I didn't want to, but the images had been coming to me unbidden for the last month, and there was no stopping them. I looked up at the saddle where Granite Mountain had stood before coming down. What did they see when they peered out at the fire before descending into the canyon? Why did they come down? I tried to get inside Eric's head, which way to go, along the 2-track road or down into the Green Box Canyon. He saw the fire moving parallel to the crew and thought they had plenty of time to cut through the canyon and make Boulder Springs Ranch. They'd save time. Would he rather be marching for those minutes or fighting the fire, saving homes, maybe saving lives? We don't know what the canyon floor looked like that day. All we know is that the nuked landscape we found after the disaster. How high was the brush? How many 20-foot trees were in front of them exactly? The strong outflow winds that had been predicted 50 minutes before hadn't arrived at 4:15. Eric scanned the terrain and decided to take a risk based on years of experience. He brought his men into the canyon. Then there was a second decision once they were deep into the chaparral and they could hear the fire approaching from the east. They had three options: head back up the wall of the canyon to the two-track road, deploy where they were, or make a run toward the ranch. Heading back up the way they came would have been a non-starter. The slope would have been covered in flames by then. Option number 1 was out, and the thickness of the chaparral would have made running impossible. Obviously, they hadn't spotted the wash that now lay to my left. It was clear as day to me, with the juniper and pine blurned away, but they hadn't seen it from the saddle. Did the guys think of dropping their packs and running? Did they debate it here on the canyon floor, shouting to each other as the fire drowned out their voices? From the positions of their bodies were found in, I know that each one of them made the decision to stick it with his brothers. No one ran. Another thing I do know, Eric would never have been brought and a granite mountain into the canyon if he thought they presented a real danger to the men. That's non-negotiable. Eric Marks didn't take stupid risks, but he did take risks. We all did. It's intrinsic to the whole idea of hotshotting, and it's not as if you're taking on these risks to climb Everest or to shoot some Class 6 rapids in a canoe. You're trying to save something: a house, a forest, a community. I thought back to the dedication in my firefighter manual I first opened when I was 14, to the members of that unselfish organization of men and women who hold devotion to duty above personal risk, who count on sincerity and service above personal comfort and convenience, who strive unceasingly to find better ways of protecting the lives, homes, and property of their fellow citizens from the ravages of fire and all other disasters, the firefighters of Knoll Nations. It didn't say anything about firefighter safety in there or about self-preservation. Not that those things weren't taught in my training. Yes, every hotshot is taught not to go into the green, especially into a box canyon bristling with chaparral, with a flaming front approaching you. That is undeniable. All I can think is that they thought they had time. And in a normal fire, they would have. But this was far from a normal fire. 13 or 15 miles per hour doesn't sound like much, but if you're moving at 5 miles per hour, and in no way can you go any faster, it's fast as hell. I looked again at the objects at my feet. The piece of glass belonged to Jesse, part of a jar filled with coffee he always carried. The tool head belonged to Chris. There was part of a mug that Eric carried with him to every job, and here it was, still intact, though black as pitch. I closed my eyes. I could see the guys desperately cutting brush to create a deployment site, heaving away their tools as the fire reached the canyon floor. I knew they were probably gasping for breath, struggling out of their packs to get the rolled-up fire shelters as all the wildfire bore down on them from above. Their thoughts quickly grew confused as their brains starved of oxygen. The noise would have been deafening by then. The smoke would have been thick and bristling with cinders, a solid black river 8 or 10 feet tall, scorching their lungs as they breathed. Then the superheated air that rushed over them, as if the blast furnace door had been thrown open, incinerated their special Nomex clothes as they crouched inside their shelters. The objects made of more durable material were freed from their pockets and dropped to the ground. And there they were, all that was left of June 30th. I touched the objects one by one, turning them over in my hands. I took each one and pictured the face of the man it belonged to, and held that picture for a moment before relinquishing it. My hands were thick with black soot that I knew contained trace amounts of the bodies of my friends. It didn't repel me to touch this dust. I missed the guys so much. I just wanted to be near them, but this would be as close as I could get. I was tempted to slip 1 or 2 of the items into my pockets as keepsakes, but the investigators wanted everything connected with the wildfire. They came over, bagged the things up, and stood up. They promised me they'd pass them on to the families. I nodded. They left me alone. I was glad I'd come to Yarnell. The last things left by the men were on their way back to their families. Perhaps they would bring them some comfort. But the questions that had obsessed me since the tragedy, and which brought me to the canyon a month after the fire, hadn't gone away. Why did my brothers die and leave me here? Why didn't they take me with them? Is it possible to continue on without them?